A ship returns, silent, scarred. The Reconditus Sanction, a Tempest-class void cutter, vanished 300 years ago near the Jericho Reach. It re-emerges without warning, right where it left, but not when. The crew is a paradox. Some are dust, some still breathing, some screaming that they've been gone only hours. The chronometers agree. 3 hours. The galaxy disagrees. 3 centuries. They are not the first. Warp routes fracture. Patrol ships arrive before they depart. Vessels ghost in from centuries ahead or behind. Sometimes they bring knowledge. Sometimes they bring infections, ideas, diseases, timelines. Administratum scribes whisper of reverse causality incidents. Astropaths dream of events that haven't happened yet. It isn't the warp alone. Something inside it is bleeding backward. So the Inquisition authorizes something it refuses to explain. No declarations, no seals. Just a name. Ordo Chronos. Their duty is not battle, it's containment. Not faith, but causality. Not heresy, but deviation. They measure history like a pressure gauge. They step between seconds. They erase what should never have been. And now, they're gone. No answers, no wrecks, no war zones. Just a silence where oversight used to be. And the clocks keep breaking. Time index, 155, the moment bends. Time in the Imperium was never stable, not really. The warp distorts it by nature. Minutes stretch into days, weeks collapse into seconds. But what began as unpredictability twisted into something worse, something targeted, coordinated, diseased. Entire planets report histories they never lived. Wars are won before they're declared. Orders are issued from officers who haven't been born. Vox relays stutter with messages from yesterday, sent tomorrow. At first, these were written off as noise, warp static, tech priest error, machine spirits acting out. But then patterns emerged. Ships reappeared at the same star dates they vanished. Chrono glitches aligned with warp tide cycles. Time loss incidents began to cluster near black ships, lost webway nodes, and cryptic ruins, artifacts the Imperium never meant to open. The worst incidents don't kill, they fold. Reality buckles, lives rewind, memories overwrite themselves, entire precincts are sealed behind null-time barricades because their future infected their present. Even the most devout administratum clerks, souls raised to never question, begin to ask the same unanswerable thing. If the past can change, how do we know who we are? The Ordo Chronos called these critical junctions. Moments where time didn't just ripple, it screamed. Where cause and effect no longer agreed on who moved first. And as these fractures multiplied, one truth settled across the High Lords like frost. If time itself can be broken, nothing, faith, history, or empire, is safe. Time, index, 410. The beginning never meant to begin. There was no proclamation, no hololith broadcast, no parade of purity seals. The Ordo Kronos wasn't founded the way most arms of the Inquisition are. It didn't emerge from a council or a schism. It surfaced like a scar beneath the skin, already formed, already spreading. Rumors trace their origin to the Jericho Reach, buried deep in the warp-wounded edges of Segmentum Obscurus. It was there, amidst a failed crusade, corrupted timelines, and the tragic recoil of Deathwatch operations, that something changed. Temporal anomalies had moved beyond isolated incidents. They were converging, breeding. What began as field notes from Ordo Malleus and Xenos operatives became patterns too precise to ignore. Inquisitors vanished mid-investigation, only to reappear a year before they left. Some returned convinced they'd completed missions no one remembered authorizing. The Ordo Kronos was greenlit by necessity, not ideology. A small internal sanction, no public record, no central chamber. Authorization passed through layered Vox encryptions and oath-bound data looms. Only those deemed chrono-tolerant, able to survive and retain cognitive integrity near temporal disturbances, were recruited. They weren't welcomed. The other Ordos viewed them as unstable, as walking paradoxes, tools that might undo more than they saved. Few trusted them. Fewer worked with them. But none denied their value. Because when time itself becomes an enemy, there is no defense but comprehension, and no hope but containment. The Ordo Kronos didn't ask for permission. They were built in the dark, to hold the dark, and now that darkness is empty. Time index 635. The rules were never meant to be read. The Ordo Kronos did not operate with codes or creeds. They moved by implication, by necessity, by the weight of a mission that could never be fully written down, because to describe it might trigger it. Their doctrine was not to change the past, it was to stop the past from changing everything else. Temporal containment, anomaly quarantine, causality enforcement, phrases buried in classified lexicons, all pointing to the same thing. Don't let time unravel. Their agents, those rare minds who could withstand paradox, worked without permanence, no official posts, no fixed jurisdictions. They were dispatched, erased, then dispatched again. Some served for decades, others disappeared on their first assignment. One returned after 900 years with no memory of departure, carrying a relic older than the Imperium. They didn't burn heretics. They unmade futures. Chrono Inquisitors carried memory-shielded ident tags, operant-sealed cogitators, and relics too unstable for Mechanicus study. Their base of operations, if you could call it that, was a nomadic lattice of reconditioned watch fortresses, time-stabilized vault ships, and self-erasing data looms. They answered only to the Inquisition's oldest code: preserve mankind, at any cost. But this cost was stranger than most. There were things they had to ignore. Some anomalies could not be stopped, only contained in ignorance. Some agents were ordered to observe paradoxes without interference, even when lives were at stake. Because sometimes, interference became the fracture. Their authority was absolute. Their timeline was not. And every mission they took rewrote the definition of what they were. Until eventually, even that became unclear. Time index 910. Not all who return are the ones who left. There were no famous names, no celebrated heroes. The Ordo Chronos didn't make legends, it made ghosts. Their agents were selected for resilience, psychic, cognitive, and moral. The kind of minds that could witness their own deaths and still finish the mission. The kind that could see a future, know it was wrong, and destroy it anyway. Some were recruited from the ranks of dying Ordos. Others were drawn from shattered timelines, alternate outcomes scrubbed clean but not forgotten. One Inquisitor had executed herself, twice, before being formally inducted. Another wore a time-sealed locket that supposedly held the identity of the right version of her. She never opened it. These weren't warriors. They were witnesses, architects, assassins of possibility. They didn't just stop events, they stopped versions of events. And sometimes, the cost of preserving one timeline was the erasure of another. There are documented cases, if you can find them, of entire worlds collapsing into paradox because a single agent made the wrong call 2 seconds early. The Imperium doesn't speak of those. But there were moments, the Venorium lockdown, where a Kronos operative convinced a Forge world to delay its founding rites by 41 seconds, averting a warp incursion that would have ruptured half the sector. The Praxis loop, where an agent returned 17 times to fix an assassination, only to die on the 18th. The Null sequence, still classified, where an entire conclave of Ordo Kronos Inquisitors was lost attempting to contain a reality recursion inside a dead hive moon. And perhaps most telling, the Solace event. A lone Kronos operative reappears on Terra, decades after her death. Her identity confirmed, her mission intact, her eyes bleeding void light. She speaks for 9 minutes. No transcript survives. She is executed by consensus. No one present ever speaks of it again. These were the ones who came back. Many didn't, and some still might. Time index 1200. The fracture comes from within. No one could agree on what counted as salvation. That was the first break. The Ordo Kronos was never built for cohesion. Its agents worked alone, their reports sealed, their missions erased even from the eyes of their peers. But as anomalies escalated, as the fractures deepened and timelines began to compete, silence became liability. So they spoke. And when they did, they argued. One camp believed in preservation. Hold the line, protect the Imperium's current thread, no matter how corrupted. Another pushed for optimization, reshape time to serve mankind better, even if it meant rewriting billions. The third, most dangerous faction, embraced stasis. Lock time in place, prevent all change. Total chronological quarantine. The conflict didn't break into war, not at first. These were not loud men. They killed with theory, with data, with edited moments. And then, agents started vanishing from secure zones. Files began rewriting themselves. An inquisitor executed during a disciplinary hearing was spotted delivering a mission briefing the next week. It was no longer disagreement. It was divergence. The Kronos strife wasn't a battle. It was a cascade. A war fought in rewrites, fought through memory edits, through preemptive retro kills and nullified assassinations. Entire missions were reversed mid-deployment. Some operatives defected to different versions of themselves. Others were silenced before they were born. And no one outside the Ordo noticed. Not because they didn't care, but because there was nothing left to observe. The Kronos strife collapsed behind them, like a timeline that had never been. Only fragments remain, burned references in Deathwatch data looms, corrupted Vox files, whispered theories in the deepest cells of Ordo Obsoletus. What caused the schism is unknown. What ended it is unclear. But what followed was absence. Time Index, 1445. The final mission never ended. The message came without origin, no encryption, no cipher, just an open burst on an ancient Deathwatch channel, last used during the Abyssal Wars. 7 words: Kronos directive confirmed, immediate convergence, no delay. It arrived seconds before the Black Shield teams launched, no authorization, no follow-up, but they obeyed. The Ordo Chronos was already fractured, internally collapsing after the Kronos strife. But they moved as one. A rare joint operation, a final alignment. They converged on a planet listed as destroyed, a dead world that shouldn't exist. Records redacted, history overwritten. The Deathwatch strike cruiser Unyielding Grace, lost with all hands a century prior, was waiting in orbit. Alive, fully crewed, confused. They claimed it was still the 41st millennium, claimed they'd just arrived. There are no detailed logs of what followed, only echoes, scrubbed fragments. A single surviving Pict record shows a Kronos Inquisitor standing on the bridge of the Grace, arm raised towards something outside the viewport, something not visible. The timestamp is corrupted. All Ordo Kronos agents involved were marked KIA. The Deathwatch contingent was reabsorbed with altered gene seed profiles. Their watch fortress, designate Pyraxis, was sealed and later destroyed under the pretense of demonic infection. But none of it adds up. The names involved don't exist in any registry. The timeline doesn't match. The coordinates point to a star system erased from all recent charts. Some suspect this was the true cause of the Ordo's disappearance. Not civil war, not collapse, but containment. A final mission to quarantine something too dangerous for time itself to witness. The Ordo Kronos may not have failed, they may have succeeded, and that's why they were erased. Time Index, 1725. There was no purge, only absence. The Inquisition has purged entire planets for less than what the Ordo Kronos became, but there is no decree, no trial, no exterminatus order bearing their name. They weren't erased, they were overwritten. You won't find their records in the Grand Archives. The entries are still there, listed under unrelated tags, redirected through sub-classifications so bloated with misfiled data they loop into themselves. Try to trace them, and you'll end up sifting through construction orders for non-existent manufactorums or war zones that never happened. This wasn't an act of censorship, it was an act of containment. The records that remain are incomplete on purpose. Half-thoughts, time-stamped twice. Vox logs cut mid-sentence. Requisition requests for equipment that hasn't existed yet. One data slate, kept in a locked vault beneath Ordo Obsoletus Precinct Sigma, simply says, "Do not recover them." Not because they were traitors, because they were infectious. Some say the Ordo Kronos became too powerful. Others claim they fractured the timeline one too many times and had to be sealed within it. There's a theory, whispered in code among librarians and astropaths, that the Ordo wasn't destroyed, but moved. Shifted into a null zone outside causality, forever locked in mission state. Alive and active, but unreachable. What's more disturbing is what keeps surfacing. Relics, markers, shards of events that no longer belong. A sealed vault discovered on a Mechanicus orbital in the Maelstrom, broadcasting a repeating plea. This is not the right Imperium. A bolter with no serials found during a Chaos incursion, later matched to a prototype that was never built. And most damning of all, a series of recovered psycho visions describing figures in sunless armor, watching battles that haven't happened yet, judging the outcomes, and leaving them to rot. No names, no insignia, but time breaks when they're near. And the logs always corrupt the same way. Kronos unknown, expunge. Time index, 2020. Some futures weren't abandoned. They were forbidden. The Ordo Chronos didn't just study time, they interfered with it. And in doing so, they uncovered futures the Imperium could not allow to exist. Some were worse than death, others were better. That was the problem. There are sealed accounts, denounced by every Ordo, yet copied in secret, of Kronos operatives who returned from temporal excursions with warnings not of chaos, not of Xenos, but of hope. Futures where the Emperor speaks again. Futures where Gilliman rewrites the Codex Astartes. Futures where humanity isn't on the edge, but rising. And every time those timelines surfaced, they collapsed. Not by accident, by design. Because the Imperium is a cathedral built on suffering, and the machine that sustains it cannot afford to dream of alternatives. Stability is faith, certainty is survival. And the Ordo Kronos had seen too much. The most heretical idea is that time itself might be better without them. There's a name that surfaces in redacted Vox fragments. Project Redark. Purpose unknown. Involves Kronos remnants. Possibly tied to the resurrection of Gilliman. In one surviving transcript from the Dark Imperium era, a Death Watch sergeant refers to time lock echoes surrounding the Primarch's return. An Inquisitor classifies it as irrelevant. The sergeant is later reassigned. No records follow. Other accounts speak of tech heresies, time phase weaponry, recursion-tuned augurs, psycho rituals meant to preload fate. All banned, all destroyed, all built on Ordo Kronos work. If any of it still exists, it does so behind vaults deeper than memory. But there's a thought. It lingers, haunts, refuses to be filed away. What if the Ordo Kronos didn't fall? What if they walked into a timeline where they were never needed? And chose to stay? Time. Index, 2310. The hands still move, but no one's watching. The Ordo Kronos is gone, that much is clear. But the anomalies remain. Ships still vanish and return altered. Star systems flicker between designations. Entire regiments speak of battles no tactician remembers authorizing, and scars they can't explain. Every time the Administratum tries to impose order, the data buckles. Every time a record is corrected, a contradiction rises somewhere else. The idea that time can be locked down was a lie. The Ordo knew it. They didn't control the clock. They stood in its shadow, trying to catch the pieces as they fell. And now, there's no one left to do even that. There are no replacements, no successor Ordo. The Imperium has quietly decided to live with the disease. Timeline deviation is listed as anomalous but non-critical. Warp-borne recursion events are flagged for monitoring. Inquiry into causality drift is suppressed. Not banned, just filed lower. The Mechanicus has its theories. The Ecclesiarchy has its dogma. The Inquisition has its silence. But none of them are watching anymore. Time is breaking again. Slowly. Relentlessly. And there's no one to say which fracture is the one that ends us. just scattered whispers of figures glimpsed before disasters. Armor with no heraldry, eyes that glow like data loom fire. Moments of hesitation before catastrophe, like the timeline is holding its breath. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe they never stopped. Or maybe they failed. Maybe the silence means the final collapse already started, and the future we're living in now isn't supposed to exist. Because if time is still breaking, and no one guards the clock, then eventually we'll run out of seconds.